I have been very much enjoying watching the miniseries The Chosen, which I know some of you have been watching, and it's well worth the time. It's done very beautifully. And what's different about The Chosen from other stories about Jesus is that it's specifically done from the eyes of the apostles, the followers, looking at the ones Jesus chose, how they responded to him. And a lot of attention is spent on their own life and how their encountering Jesus has changed them for the better. And what I like about it especially is that it doesn't hold back on any of the very ordinariness of the men that Jesus chose as his 12 apostles that we hear mentioned to the gospel reading today. I think sometimes when we think of the apostles, we think of these great larger-than-life figures afterwards who went into foreign lands preaching the gospel and all dying horrible deaths, convinced they'd seen Jesus risen from the dead. And that's certainly true. But we forget what they were when he called them. Very ordinary men. Jesus didn't call any of the high priests, the Sanhedrin, anybody from them, from the Pharisees or the Sadducees. He didn't call any of them. He didn't call tremendously learned people. In fact, according to tradition, the only one who was actually had an education was Judas Iscariot. And of course, look what happened with him. He called simple workers, people who earned their living by the sweat of their brow. And they had all the normal foibles that you and I have. And if we look at the scriptures, we see how they frequently argued with each other. They quarreled, and there was a sense of jealousy among some of them, that Jesus seemed to be showing favoritism to one apostle over another. Sibling rivalries, you had two sets of brothers there, Peter and Andrew, James and John. And The Chosen brings out a lot of that, so the normal things that would happen between brothers. And then the difficulty of some of the apostles getting along with others. Both The Chosen and Franco Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth both bring out the same pair of people that they point a real animosity between, and it makes perfect sense, and that is Simon Peter and Matthew. Remember, Matthew was a tax collector. Tax collectors were Jews who betrayed their own people, worked for the Romans to collect money from them, the taxes from them, to give to the Romans, and they became very wealthy in the process. And so tax collectors were despised by the rest of the people, considered unclean, and put in the same category as prostitutes. And Jesus, while he calls Simon and Andrew, James and John, who were fishermen, and others, you see in The Chosen especially how annoyed they are that Jesus would think to choose a tax collector to be among them. And yet we see even in it how Matthew had repented of what he had done. He changes his mind, he turns back, he leaves his tax collecting, as we see, and follows the Lord. But Simon especially has a hard time with this man, because here he was struggling to make a living, and the money that he was able to make fishing to support his family, Matthew was taking a good chunk of that to give to the Romans. And so you see, it took a long time in The Chosen for Simon Peter to start accepting Matthew. And that happened with several of the others. We also see other types of sinners among them, like Simon the Zealot. Simon was a member of a group that today would be like being part of Al-Qaeda, somebody who was out advocating overthrowing the Romans by violence, training to try to strike at the Roman armies and try to drive them out of Israel. And of course, the thought of it was noble in their mind, but ridiculous to think that that small band of Jews was going to be able to throw out the mighty Roman Empire. And he leaves his zealot life behind and instead follows Jesus as a worker of peace. And of course, there are some who are lifers among them, people who were faithful from the beginning, such as Andrew and Philip, who were known to be followers of John the Baptist, and others who came along, we really don't know much about them, but ultimately came to follow Jesus. Very ordinary men who continued to be very ordinary men, even throughout all of Jesus' ministry. And it's only after Pentecost, when they're filled with the Holy Spirit, that they actually go out on fire and are no longer afraid to go out and preach Jesus, and they do that even until their deaths. They had differences of opinion even then. When St. Paul was added on, he and Peter differed on things. Peter and James differed on the whole question of bringing the Gentile converts into the church. So there were always going to be differences of opinion. But I've always been amazed at how Jesus chose everyday, ordinary people filled with all of the foibles and the weaknesses that you and I have. And I've always seen that as a reminder that The apostles didn't have anything more than we had when Jesus called them to follow him. When they were filled with the Holy Spirit, yes, then of course they had the strength to go out and preach the gospel. But before that, they were ordinary people, and I'm sure sometimes Jesus was a little frustrated with them in having to put up with, in The Chosen, he talks about Simon's temper and some of the other difficulties among them. And we see that even in the scriptures very clearly spelled out. But it's a reminder to me that you and I can do what the apostles did. They didn't have anything more than you and I have. And you and I were called to be just like the apostles. As they were the chosen ones, so we are the chosen. The day of our baptism, every one of us was sealed with sacred chrism that was repeated at our confirmation. And we were consecrated priest, prophet, and king to go out and be a Christ person, to bring Christ to the world. And as Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. When he saw the people and saw they were troubled and abandoned, does that not describe our world today? How much confusion there is. How many people who know that the way the world is going is not the right way, but don't know where to find the right way. That you and I know is right here in the gospel of Christ, following him. You and I are called to go out and be Christ in the world, in whatever our particular vocations are, our walks of life, our duty, whether we're working for a living, retired, whether we're students in school, whatever it may be. The Lord calls all of us to go out and be his presence. We need to be filled with the Holy Spirit the way they were, the apostles were. And if we only ask the Lord to fill us with the Holy Spirit, he will do so. And he will give us the strength to go out and preach Christ and not worry if some people don't like it, if they criticize us for it, even abuse us and call us names because we are followers of Christ. They call Jesus the same things. Don't be afraid. Go out and be his chosen ones in the world so that through you, through me, we can bring Christ to this troubled and abandoned world that so desperately needs him. May Jesus Christ be praised, now and forever.